Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Viper versus Leenock, day number 4 of the $100,000 N4C Main Event Swiss stage. It's now or never for Viper. He's 0-3 in the first 3 days of N4C, and if he wants to avoid elimination, he really needs a win here. Meanwhile, on the other side, there is Leenock, who won his first set and then he lost the other two, so he's currently standing at 1-2, and of course he himself wants to take a step away from elimination, and because of that, for him, this set is also going to be quite important, but especially for Viper, the importance of this set is just unquestionable. It is right now a make or break for him. Spawning in on the left side of the map, we will have Leenock playing as the red Mongols, and on the right side, we will have Viper playing as the Mongols as well in blue. The first map that we are playing is Hill and Dale, which is an unconventional start, but we do have to keep in mind that in this tournament, each player picks 2 home maps for themselves and bans 1 map, which means that whatever map is left after the picks and bans is going to be the game number 1 map. Now you will see a couple of things about that draft, and that's going to be an interesting one to take a look at, because you will see Viper banning Dry Arabia. We will talk about that in between the games over here, but for the time being, let's talk about the Mongols being picked on this map, because on Hill and Dale, you're talking about civilizations like HRE, you're talking about civilizations like Delhi, civilizations that can somehow capitalize on a control over the middle. Talk about capturing the sacred sites, capturing the relics. Mongols is not an unprecedented pick on this map, but you have to consider something, and that is the fact that the Mongols cannot make walls, which means that it's very difficult, if not impossible, for the Mongols to just protect their flanks on this map, which makes it much more legitimate for either of these players to raid the opponent's base. In an HRE mirror, for example, you would just have the players walled up in late game, so it would be difficult to raid. But in this particular matchup, it's going to be much easier to do so. Now, it looks like Viper is going to be able to yoink a sheep from the back of the scout of Leenock. Leenock added 1 extra scout so that he's going to be able to get some extra sheep for himself. Loses that sheep that was trailing his starting scout. Looking at the map of the players over here for a brief moment, I will need to open up my drawing software for that. Hang on. Drawing software, please. Here we go. So one of the things that you should note about Viper's map is how close the right side is. On Hill and Dale, you always have free plateaus or free exits from your hill. You do have 1 over here for Viper on the right side, 1 on the left side, and then 1 right next to it. But this entire section over here is closed. And this is immensely helpful for a Mongol mirror because, as I said, it's difficult to protect these crossings over here because you can't just wall them off. So the fact that you have 2 of your free entrances very close to each other makes it much easier for Viper to just concentrate his efforts on that side and sort of ignore this northern side, especially given the fact that this is so far away from the opponent. And it looks like for Viper, he is going to have enough sheep to work with, although some of those villagers might be idle. Actually, it's a little difficult to tell. If you don't have enough sheep to work on, some of those villagers will just go idle because they just can't access the carcass. Now, looking at the other side, for Leenock, his exits from his base are somewhat more evenly distributed. There is 1 on the north over here, 1 in the middle that's quite wide, and 1 on the left side as well. So it's going to be a little more difficult for him to defend his base at the beginning. Now, looking at the villager counts, Leenock has a 1 villager lead over here, which is a little surprising given the fact that he has added 1 scout. He's adding 2 pastures, whereas Viper already has 2 pastures going for him. Both players have the Ovu close to the town center, which means that their pastures can be close to the TC and also can be affected by the Ovu. And neither of the players have the town center close to the wood line and the gold. So this means that both players will have to add the Gur here. So far, a very similar start for both of these players. And in a Mongol mirror on this map, it's going to come down to whoever is becoming the first aggressor, I believe. Because whoever is becoming the first aggressor could be able to secure some map control for himself. And if we get to Castle Age, we could talk about the players picking up the relics over here. And that would still be a significant factor in a mirror matchup like this one. Deerstones coming in on the right side for Viper, whereas on the left side, I do believe it's the Deerstones coming in as well for Leenock. So for the time being, the build orders are very similar, and when you're seeing this many pastures, you're most likely thinking about full Castle Age plays for the players. It's going to be just 2 pastures for Leenock. Viper is operating with 3, but as you see, Leenock was quite successful collecting sheep with the Khans, so he won't have to build that 3rd pasture for the time being. Looks like we'll be operating with 5 villagers on that landmark for the Viper. He is pretty decent when it comes to the gold mining operation. He should have enough gold to click up to Castle Age once he gathers all the food he needs. Whereas on the other side for Leenock, similar situation, he seems to be a little lower on the resource bank department. Both players made that Ovu right at the start, so you can see that the stone counts are head-to-head for the time being. And it looks like Viper is sending a new Gur to be placed on the hunt. That's going to be a big investment at the beginning, if you think about that, because that Gur is going to be quite a hefty sum of wood that he's going to spend on it, but of course this way he's going to have access to the hunt. This also means that he's not that much reliant on those pastures at the beginning. This will be spotted by Leenock, and I wonder if Leenock is going to do anything similar to this, because at this point I feel like you should probably just rely on your sheep, especially if you already have 2 or 3 operational pastures over here. You see, Leenock is going to harass Viper as much as possible. Not unprecedented. Once again, you're just trying to damage those villagers, because even if you can't kill them, one thing that you can accomplish with this is that you can make sure that whenever you come in for an attack, there will be weak villagers from the opponent. Defensive tower coming in here for Leenock, and it looks like Viper is going to get pushed by the scout of the opponent as well. The scout goes down. That's going to be a big loss over there for Leenock, because that scout could have been quite helpful to just try and burn down that Gur. So that's a big loss over there for Leenock. He did lose his extra scout. Viper leaves behind the scouting falcon for the time being as he runs away with his con. For now, Viper is heavy on the pastures. He decided to want to add an extra one after losing access to the hunt. Whereas for Leenock, he's still operating with just 2, and now we're seeing a barracks and a stable being dropped. Both of the players piling up resources, but it looks like Leenock isn't thinking about Castle Age over here. Viper seems to be planning to just go straight to Castle, given the fact that he has already 600 food in the bank and 300 gold in the bank. Hasn't used a single bit of stone, which means that he will be able to afford quite a lot of men-at-arms with double training, and potentially some lancers as well. Talking about unit compositions, if this battle goes to Castle Age, this is gonna come down to a combination of men-at-arms, lancers, crossbowmen, to a certain extent spearmen, and siege weapons. And one of the things that you will have to consider for this battle is that you will have to keep changing up your unit composition. You will have to mix in quite a lot of different types of units based on what your opponent is bringing in. So, for example, the players will try to open up with lancers and men-at-arms. Someone, especially the player falling behind in numbers, will try to mix in crossbows. As a response to the crossbows, you can start adding mangonels. Response to that from the other player could be springolds, or you could see some spearmen added onto the battlefield. Spearmen could force the opponent to add archers. So we could see a whole palette of units appearing on the battlefield, simply because the Mongols are just so effective, no matter what kind of unit they are going for, that you're just going to see pretty much all those units on the battlefield if the players keep reacting to each other's moves. For now, the cons will trade some arrows over here, as Viper is on the way to Castle Age. This will be spotted by Leenock, who himself is now thinking about Castle. The only difference between the 2 players seems to be the fact that Leenock decided to go for the production buildings at first, and only then think about Castle Age, whereas for Viper, he's piling up resources for Castle Age first, and as he's going up to Castle, he's dropping those production buildings. Leenock still has quite a lot of sheep to work with, 19 to be precise, which is, well, quite a hefty sum of sheep out there. Looks like Viper is hunting for that last con over there. Leenock will have to pull it away for the time being. As things stand, if you look at the resource bank, it's going to be a ton of stone to work with for both players, so the army numbers will rise quite rapidly as the players get to Castle Age. Viper is going to operate with what I think is a stable. Am I right about that? Let's see. That seems to be a barracks. So Viper is going to be playing with men-at-arms over here, and he's not messing around. He's going for the improved siege engineering upgrade right away. It is going to be double barracks, likely men-at-arms from him, although he's starting off with a spearman. It's only a single spearman being trained, though. It's not a double training just yet. So I gotta wonder if that's just to get some additional vision. Send forward the spearman, maybe even act as a decoy. It's a possibility. Viper is a big mind game player, so he might think, okay, I'm going to send the spearman forward, make my opponent think that I'm going for spears, and then just go for double barracks men-at-arms. Although, the obvious choice is men-at-arms, so I think Leenock should expect that. Below the face cams of the players, you can see the heart rates of the players. This is courtesy of a smartwatch company that is sponsoring the event. And as you see, Leenock is at 115. One thing that I've observed watching Leenock is that his heart rate is always very high. But that doesn't seem to affect him by any means. is just his natural habitat, so to say, which is interesting to see given the fact that some other players like Mista have much lower heart rates, yet are able to accomplish, well, comparable things in this tournament so far. For the time being, it looks like Viper was successful picking off one villager from Leenock on that gold mine. You could see that for a brief moment, as it looks like we have a prayer tent coming in for Viper. Viper is one of those players who does appreciate the relics, and this is something that he's going to utilize. He's going to start picking those up as soon as possible, and Leenock is doing the exact same thing. So far, the two players are just mirroring each other over here. The only difference really seems to be the case that Viper currently has 37 villagers and 7 army, as opposed to just 35 villagers and 4 army from Leenock. Now, one of the things to consider when it comes to a Mongol mirror is that in these direct engagements between the two players, positional warfare is going to be a quite significant factor. So, how can you position your army? How can you outmaneuver the opponent potentially? And one of the things that can help immensely with that is towers and the YAM speed network. And as you see, Viper is pushing up towers, so he's going to be able to just increase his YAM network. And also those towers with spring-load emplacements can really just be a good staging ground for your forces. It allows you to just go assemble those forces around that position, and then even if you get pushed, it's also going to act as a very nice extra firepower to work with. Meanwhile, Leenock is trying to pick off the spears, pursuing that Khan over here. Now that's a costly H Khan, which means that it's going to be able to take down spears quite rapidly. As you see, the infantry is pursuing, but it's just going to be called off for the time being. Viper at 19 army as opposed to just 10 from Leenock. Leenock is still outnumbered a tiny bit as the prayer tents are up, so the players will start moving towards the relics. Looks like towers are also coming in here for Leenock, and indeed, upon seeing the man-at-arms, Leenock is going to start adding his own crossbowmen, and this is not something that Viper has just yet. Viper is preemptively adding a springload over here, so he would be ready for any mangonels to come from the opponent. There is none coming right now, as Viper is moving towards those first relics up north. First mangonel in the making for the Viper. He already has improved siege engineering. No idea if Leenock has that, but I would suspect that in this scenario, in a Mongol mirror, you want to grab that upgrade as soon as possible. And as you see, now the Springolds no longer have a high base attack, but they do have a large amount of anti-siege damage, so they're anti-siege specialists nowadays. Looks like both players are currently sitting on one relic. You can see that at the top of the screen, as it looks like now Viper is rolling up with his forces. Springgold will open up against the Mangonel of Viper. Looks like it is going to be a Mangonel traded for a Springgold over here, or not. Look at that. It is going to be the Mangonel surviving, and suddenly Viper is pushing in here. Viper does not have crossbows over here, whereas Leenock does, and that could help tremendously to just wipe out all of those man-at-arms from Viper. You also have a tower with a Springgold emplacement on it, which is immensely helpful for Leenock. So despite the fact that he's being heavily outnumbered here by Viper's forces, he's actually taking a good engagement because, as you see, his own men-at-arms are shielding the crossbows from the enemies, and those crossbows pack a big punch against the men-at-arms, and as you see, with the help of the Springgold Tower, the crossbowmen, Viper's forces, though outnumbering the ones from Leenock, they are able to take a victory over here, and it looks like Viper is going to be forced to retreat. That's a big victory there for Leenock. He's also trying to pick off one of those escaping men-at-arms, might actually be able to do that because it's only a tiny bit of HP left over there, and indeed, the Springgold Tower will finish off that last men-at-arms. One relic still available for both players, so not a ton of relic picked up just yet, and it looks like we are going to have Leenock moving to the north with a couple more towers. So he wants to expand his influence quite a bit, because that's going to help a lot make sure that Viper cannot flank him. This is one of the biggest dangers in this scenario. You never know if your opponent is making 5 Lancers, and he's just going to send those Lancers into your eco straight away. So by having all these towers all across the map, first of all, you expand your own YAM network, so your movement speed all across the map is going to be spectacular. And most importantly, you get so much vision that it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to do any kind of damage to your economy, because you should have a fairly large window to react. Looks like both players are now up to 2 relics. The only unclaimed relic is in this corner, which should be accessible for Viper, but you gotta wonder if he scouted that, because that's one of the big questions right now. It's possible that neither of those players scouted that part of the map yet. We'll have to see about that one. For now, it looks like Viper is still operating with men-at-arms, whereas on the other side, Leenock is dropping Springald emplacements on all of those towers, and he has built a second town center. That's going to help quite a bit with his economy, and this is one of the powers, one of the underappreciated powers of the Mongols, the fact that they can make two town centers without mining stone. They don't have to consume their stone for it. Of course, there is an extra wood cost associated with the town center, but that's still fairly affordable for the Mongols, and in scenarios like this, it's rather reasonable for Leenock to add that second town center and try to carve out a villager lead. Viper's banking up some resources, Leenock doing the same thing. In fact, Leenock is floating 1,000 gold right now. But in this sort of stalemate scenario, Leenock having that extra town center is going to help quite a bit, so that villager gap is going to start growing and growing. Economy upgrade-wise, Leenock is also ahead. You see he already has the lumberjacking upgrade, the mining upgrade as well over Viper. And also, horticulture is something he just finished. Viper already has that upgrade. So at this point, the economy of Leenock is much, much better, and he has quite a lot of pastures to operate with as well. We're going to see Viper starting to capture the sacred sites, and down south there is going to be a relic. Viper picking the relic up, trying to Vololo the Khan over here. If I'm not mistaken, you can't Vololo a Khan, but it looks like the Khan is just going to leave the circle, so it's not going to do any good here for Viper, and it very much seems like the Khan of Leenock will pick off Viper's Scholar over here. Viper will lose the Shaman carrying the relic, and with that, he's going to have to bring another one to pick it up. Still, Viper's got map control over here, so I would be surprised if he did not grab this relic. And now it's possible that Leenock is going to lose that Khan over there. There was a Shaman, you could see for a brief moment for Leenock, so he's trying to sneak up on that relic, trying to capture that. I think that Shaman is hiding in the stealth forest. Indeed, that guy is just hiding in the stealth forest out there. Viper trying to cut off the escape path of that Khan over there. And it looks like for the time being, Leenock is going to be able to call off his Khan, but his Shaman gets found in the stealth forest. The Khan of Viper does have vision into stealth forests because it acts as a scout, which means that this Shaman will just go down to Viper's Khan. Khan also getting killed over here. That must have been the Khan of Leenock because Viper's Khan is still alive. But in the end, it looks like Leenock is going to lose his Khan, but he's opening up on the right side. There's a defensive tower. Viper went on towards the berries. And this is one of the things I'm noticing here for Viper. He's putting a lot of emphasis on hunt and berries, which is a thing that you don't usually do when you are playing with the Mongols. It looks like this step up never was placed over here for Leenock. That's going to be annoying. So what happened probably is that he placed it, then he looked away and maybe a villager walked into the zone and just blocked it. And because of that, his gold miners are now taking a fairly long walk back home with that gold. And of course, they're not even getting the benefit from the step out drop-off. At some point, Leenock is going to fix that, but it's going to be annoying to deal with, and Viper is now launching counterattack with horsemen. This is what I was referring to. The fact that you can't wall yourself off is going to make it very difficult for you to protect your base, and raids into the opponent's economy are much more legitimate than in the case of a different mirror matchup, for example, let's say HRA mirrors. Defensive towers are being rushed up by Leenock right now. Viper is detaching a couple of horsemen trying to hit those gold miners. Looks like a couple of gold miners will go down over here. Remember that Leenock has 2 town centers, currently possessing a 9 villagers lead, so he can afford to lose 1 or 2 villagers over Viper, especially if he's also pushing Viper's food eke over there. This is by far not a good fight over there for Leenock. He's going to lose quite a lot of villagers, in fact, on that gold mine, and Viper is going to force some of those men-at-arms back as well. Viper probably spotted the second town center too, so now he knows that his opponent likely has the villager advantage. Military numbers are much better for Viper right now, 61 to 42, so that's something to consider. But there's a second factor, and this is something that we have to mention, especially in a Mongol mirror. The thing is that your military population consists of 2 things. The sort of combat units, which sounds a little stupid, but basically the human power and the siege power. And the thing is that most of the population here for the players is going to be the siege power. Which, well, to a certain extent sounds good, but if you think about it, what can a trebuchet do in a battle against the enemy cavalry or infantry? Nothing. What can springolds do against them? Minimal. So, the army numbers, the pure army numbers are one thing. However, you also have to consider the composition, because a more balanced composition, something that has a good mix of anti-siege and then anti-human, so to say, is going to be much more effective in battle than, let's say, a larger military population that has 4 or 5 trebuchets in it. Now, Viper doesn't have that. Looks like we had a bit of a lag spike over here. Hopefully, we are still all good. We do have increasing army numbers for both players over here. Leenock still possessing a 7 villagers lead. And as I see, Viper is very heavy on the siege. So if you look at Leenock's army, it does have quite a lot of human power. Viper's got a lot of springles, and that's going to be helpful against Leenock's siege, but Leenock barely has siege. And it looks like Leenock is launching a counterattack over here. He's sending all his forces to the north to Viper's base, whereas Viper is going to push in the middle. So suddenly, both of the players are taking a risk over here. They're saying, okay, I'm confident in my defense back at home, and I'm just going to push your eco. But this is a risk. This is a risk taken by both sides, and whoever is going to fail with this gamble is going to be in a very difficult position. Now, it looks like Leenock's opening here is a little bit better. That Gur is gonna get burnt down, which is going to give him a nice bounty. Mangonels and Springles rolling up here for Viper. The question is, what does Leenock have back at home to defend against this one? The answer is that he's got a Mangonel and he's got some Springles. His Springles getting the volleys out and takes down the Mangonel. That's very important because now all those spearmen and all those crossbows can start opening up against the horsemen. Looks like the horsemen from Viper trying to take down the Mangonel here. Spearmen will wipe them out, but the Mangonel gets taken down before that happens. Crossbow still alive, however, and right now, the only thing that Viper has is just men-at-arms, which will be destroyed by the crossbows. And if you look at the other side of the map, Leenock is sending in his own units into Viper's base. Spearmen by Leenock being sent to take down the Springles will be quite successful doing that. And now Leenock's forces are just marching into the base of Viper over here. Viper losing his numbers quite rapidly here on the battlefield. The crossbows focusing down the men-at-arms, and now Viper forced to run. The Mangonel just rolling right next to the town center, and the food eco for Viper now is in jeopardy because all of the villagers on those sheep are idle. And on the other side, it looks like Leenock is going to pull villagers. He doesn't want to let those Springles roll away. He's going to take down 2 more Springles. Viper does have 3 relics over 2 of the opponent, as you see, but now his pastures are being burned down. Those buildings are so easy to burn down. And all of that is going to give so much bounty for Leenock at this point. And as you see, Viper's eco, a substantial amount of Viper's eco at least, is idle. 20 villagers in that town center. But those men-at-arms just don't care. They have the numbers advantage. They do have a high ranged armor, so they will just continue to burn down those pastures. And if you look at Viper's army, is it 36? But some of that is a trebuchet, for example, which, as we discussed, is not going to help at all. And you just don't see the human component of Viper's army. You don't see a ton of men-at-arms. You don't see a ton of crossbows over here for him. He's just now trying to rebuild his army to the south. He has quite a lot of horsemen to work with. But of course, behind this one, Leenock is capitalizing on the fact that Viper is pinned inside his own base. And you do see a direct push assembled in the middle as well, with spearmen crossbows coming in. Viper now trying to pull away the buildings, assembling a new force on the south. But this force isn't also numbering quite a lot of units here. Just some horsemen, some men-at-arms over here for Viper. He's getting some siege weapons on the battlefield to snipe the opponent's Springolds, as indeed, he gets a good shot on Leenock's Springold out there, but the counter volley is going to take down Viper's Springold, and you see, the direct push in the middle is what's going to be devastating for Viper. He's losing the towers that will also give a bounty for Leenock for burning them down. And now, even though the Springolds and the men-at-arms are now going down, I think Leenock is ready to give up on this force and just say, okay, I'm going to focus on the middle now. Looking at the military numbers, Leenock is at 47, his opponent 39, so the army numbers are still rather close. The concerning thing right now for Viper is that he's very much behind in terms of villagers, and despite the fact that he has 1 extra relic, he's lacking map control, and what's more important, as I said, is that he's behind by 20 plus villagers, and the Viper's got no food eco. Because all of those villagers were idle for so long, his food eco was non-existent for the last couple of minutes, and with 45 food per minute right now, he isn't going to be able to replenish his army. Leenock, on the other hand, 1500 food per minute, which means that he's going to have a very consistent food income, allowing him to just replenish those forces. Viper is sending in all the forces to the middle. He's got a lot of lancers, a lot of horsemen going on as well. Mangonel gets a beautiful shot out there for Viper. Counter volley coming in here from Leenock. He's going to take down the first Mangonel, second Mangonel, rolling into position, gets some rocks out over here before the Springolds open fire, but it looks like with the crossbows retreating, Viper isn't able to get a shot out, and it looks like the Mangonels of Leenock, the Springolds of Leenock will be sacrificed, but he's going to take down Viper's siege, and now with spearmen appearing on the battlefield, and the crossbows still standing strong, Viper only has heavy infantry and heavy cavalry left. Those crossbows will be able to take a rather reasonable engagement over here. Leenock isn't taking the best fight of his life. In fact, it's a quite bad battle for him. He was sort of surrounded by horsemen on the siege weapon department. His crossbows weren't ready to fight off that many horsemen. But in the end, He has a much easier job replenishing his army, and you see, this is almost the last hurrah here for Viper, because Viper knows fully well that replenishing this army might not be a possibility. Leenock currently sitting at 34 army, Viper at 25. Army numbers still rather close. But of course, Leenock growing that economy more and more, he is going to be able to field a lot larger army in the next couple of minutes. Viper rebuilding those towers. He's not ready to give up on this just yet. But now Leenock is adding more siege over here for himself. Viper siege is only one mangonel at this point. He needs those mangonels to deal with the crossbowmen, because as long as the crossbows are over there, Viper's men-at-arms won't be able to do that much against the army of Leenock. Leenock, of course, he's going to need his own springles to take down the opponent's mangonels. As things stand, it looks like Viper's got quite a lot of pastures far away from the town center. He doesn't really have the time right now to address that issue. And it looks like there's going to be a traction trebuchet opening fire on those springolds. It looks like Leenock is just going to call off his forces, cancels the springolds, and he's going to be like, okay, I need a little bit more breeding room. I need those springolds out there. Viper is doing the right thing right now. He's trying to raid his way back into the game. He does intercept 2 springolds in the middle. That's going to be a great pickup from him. He's also picking off the shaman that was trying to capture that sacred site. And now he's rolling forward. We will have to consider that at some point the players start running out of resources on their own hills, so they'll have to start fighting for the wood and the gold in the middle, but that is still yet to come. Here comes Viper's cavalry, only minimal forces over there. He sent most of his cavalry to Leenock's base, who are inflicting quite a lot of casualties on Leenock's wood line. Leenock doesn't seem to be noticing the fact that he's getting massacred back at home, and this could be Viper's way back into the game. Viper combined that push in the middle very nicely with that raid, and Leenock wasn't able to notice this one. Leenock is focusing in the middle, and Leenock just lost like 15 villagers in the last 1 minute or so. This being said, the horsemen are getting cleaned up, and now Leenock is ready for direct push. He's got 2-to-1 army numbers right now. 3 mangonels ready to go as well. The yam speed still affecting Viper's men-at-arms trying to jump on the mangonels. Crossbows picking them off as they go. They will be able to take down 1 mangonel. A second mangonel is going down, and a third mangonel will also be taken down here. The crossbows are doing work, but Leenock wasn't really able to protect most of his siege weapons for the time being, and looks like his villagers are still getting slain left and right. The villager count just equalized. All this distraction to Leenock meant that he wasn't able to address that issue, and if you look at the villager counts, it's dead even. That one raid from Viper might have been a game winner for him potentially, but at minimum an equalizer, because now Leenock is addressing that issue, but it's a little too late. 73 to 70 is the villager count. Viper with that group of cavalry just raided himself back into this game, and now he's back on track. Leenock is still struggling to finish off this game. One thing that he could have done before was potentially get some cavalry going himself and raid just like Viper did. Viper's got the stables already, so Viper, for him, the recipe is clear. He needs to do the exact same thing as he did before, sort of stall out the middle and then raid his way back into the game. He was successful equaling out the villager count. The next step for him is carving out a villager advantage. Looks like here we go, indeed, horsemen being sent from the south here by the Viper, and once again he's going to try and push the middle, distract Leenock, and as Leenock is distracted, he's going to try and get the raid going. Looks like the battering ram here for Leenock is going to be short-lived. It gets picked off by Viper Springolds, but here goes Leenock. He's got the Springold numbers as well, and he's opening up against those towers. Most of those towers for Viper do have Springold emplacements on them, but some only have arrow slits. Viper did intercept some reinforcements on the left side, but as it seems, we're going to have Leenock picking off the Springolds from Viper, and with the last Springold from Viper going down, it means that Leenock still has Springolds on the battlefield, which could mean that he can take down Viper's mangonels here. Mangonels still standing strong here for Leenock, and these numbers are much greater compared to Viper's ones. 70 army versus 30 here, and this is the fight that Viper somehow needs to win, but how is he going to do that? Having such a low number in the middle. He's got 3 towers to help out with. He's trying to snap the mangonels. He actually pulled all the cavalry back that was sent to raid to snap the mangonels, and he is successful taking down all of those. He's trying to snipe the Springold right now with the horseman. That's going to be unsuccessful, however. The Springold still stands strong, And this Springald is the tool that Leenock needs to take down that Mangonel. He's opening up against the Mangonel gets taken down, and now Viper has no tools to inflict massive amounts of damage to large amounts of infantry. Viper sitting at 14 army, Leenock at 69, very nice, and now he's overrunning Viper. Every single tower being burned down is going to give extra resources for Leenock, which is just fueling this push even more. And now you're looking at Leenock potentially overrunning Viper. 25 crossbows, 21 spearmen, 16 men-at-arms, some Springolds on the party as well. This is the unit composition that Viper is struggling to stop right now. He doesn't have siege anymore, and he's just unable to wipe out large groups of infantry fast. And Viper taps out. With that, Leenock takes game number 1 over here. Huge win for Leenock here in game number 1. As we discussed, this is Viper versus Leenock, but the key thing is that this is Viper's tournament life on the line potentially. Looking at the civilizations here in the draft, just for a brief moment, we're going to chalk in a victory here for Leenock. He's going to take the win with Mongols, and for Viper, he's going to lose his own Mongols as well. Hillandale is a win for Leenock. And looking at the home maps real quickly, Viper has chosen King of the Hill and Highview as his own home maps, but the interesting thing is that he's banning Dry Arabia. Normally speaking, Viper is an open map specialist. He's a great player. He's one of the most accomplished Age of Empires players in the history of the game. He loves to play Arabia. Why would he ever ban Arabia? The answer is rather simple. He's understanding that the competition right now is very difficult, and he is almost the underdog going into this set. And Arabia, and generally speaking, open maps, is a map that favors the more skilled players, so to say. And Viper is probably saying, look, I'm not so confident that I can beat Leenock on Arabia. Now, of course, there is another open home map for him, which is Highview. But Highview is slightly different. Highview has that concealment element, Highview has that stealth forest element, and that's very significant over here, because obviously that's going to mean that the Leenock could be raided from multiple directions from Viper. Viper is very good when it comes to using those stealth forests, so that's going to be a component to look at there. But Viper is going to have to make a decision, King of the Hill or Highview, two massively different maps to play on. We'll have to see what Viper chooses as his first home map. Welcome back to Viper versus Leenock. This is game number 2, spawning in on the northern side of the map. It is going to be the Viper playing as the Abbasid dynasty in blue. And down south, you're going to see Leenock playing as the French in red. Viper decided to go for Highview as his own home map over here. A map that, as I said, could play to his strengths because he's a very smart player. He's a player that understands map control and understands how to utilize the stealth forest to his biggest advantage. And another advantage that he's going to have is that he's playing with the Abbasid dynasty against the French, a civilization matchup that we are seeing very frequently in this tournament, and a civilization matchup that is usually favoring the Abbasid player. We're seeing more and more that the Abbasid spearman horseman unit composition to fight off archers and knights in feudal age, or just the ability to play 2 town centers into an early castle age, is something that's very difficult to deal with for the French. So this is an uphill battle for the French player over here. Looks like we're going to have Viper operating with 1 scout only. He was moderately successful grabbing some sheep for himself. He's got 4 trailing his scout as we speak. Whereas on the other side, we'll have to see what Leenock was able to get away with. But I would suspect that Leenock has to have more, because Viper scouted quite a lot of the map over here, and he didn't find a ton of sheep to work with. He's dropping the House of Wisdom as we speak, and he's going to have the gold mine up front. Whereas for Leenock, he's going to have his gold mine quite exposed as well, so that's going to be quite significant concern, if I may say so. Looks like Leenock was also somewhat unsuccessful gathering sheep for himself. He's going to have the gold mine quite exposed, and this is the first weaknesses of the French over here against the Abbasids. In general, the biggest weakness of the French feudal age is the fact that the moment they get cut off from the gold mine, they are in trouble. So, as you will see, depending on how exposed the gold mines are for a French, they could be in quite significant trouble. Looks like Viper is about to find the opponent's base over here. Right now, both of those scouts sort of stalking in those shadows as we speak. And it looks like Viper is going up the feudal age with the economy wing. No surprise over there for him. The big question is whether or not he's going to play 2 town centers. I would think that he will, because that's almost a meta pick against the French. and it sort of puts the French on a timer, because if they don't push the Abbasid player, will just boom up. So by far the safest and probably most meta civilization pick here against the French is the Abbasids, and by far the safest and most meta strategy choice with the Abbasids against the French is going for the 2 town center play. Now you could see for a brief moment that Leenock is dropping a mill. Given the fact that he was quite successful collecting sheep, I would suspect that that mill is for professional scouts. And looking at his gold count, he still has 120 per minute, which means that he's still mining. Now, of course, it could be for knights, but in these scenarios, especially if he's dropping a mill and he still has sheep to work with, I would suspect that a professional scout's build could be in order. And one of the things that the French can do against the Abbasid 2 town center play is go for basically a professional scout's fast castle build, and they utilize that castle age advantage with Royal Knights. Most of the times we're seeing players going for men-at-arms when they go for a fast castle against the Abbasids. And the thing with that is that by the time your men-at-arms arrive to the opponent's base, the opponent, Viper, is going to have castle age himself, and he's going to have crossbows to defend against the men-at-arms. Now, of course, you could ask why men-at-arms. The answer is rather simple, because the Abbasids will probably drop a barracks here to defend against cavalry attacks, so they will have spearmen. Response to that from the players going into Castle Age is men-at-arms. But I still believe that despite the fact that the Abbasids can defend with spearmen here, I think it's a better choice to just go for fast castle knights, because you can use your mobility and start just tearing apart the opponent's eco. So I would think that for Leenock, his best bet here might be fast castle knights and archers. Looks like there is a technology being researched on the mill. It is not wheelbarrow for Leenock, and we don't have it on the overlay right now, so I'm actually curious to see what exactly that is. We do have the scouts harassing the stone miners here from Viper. Now Leenock has a clear confirmation that Viper wants to go for a second TC, and that second town center is heavily delayed over here. You see Viper is only sitting at 98 stone. Looks like this is not the overlay that the overlay guy wanted to switch to. Oops, bit of a wrong button pressed by the production crew out there. Or is this the actual overlay? I don't think so. That's probably the wrong button by the production crew. Indeed, that's the overlay they wanted to switch to. So Viper's POV over here, he's pulling away the weak villagers, but I just want to highlight the stone count for him. He's at 115, which means that he's very far away from that second town center. The French won't be able to completely deny that second town center, but you just saw Leenock forcing a tower out of Viper, and you just saw Leenock delaying Viper's second town center. That's the best thing that you can hope for over here with the Abbasids, and you see, Leenock keeps probing and probing with those scouts, because he's understanding that every second he delays Viper is precious seconds for the Abbasid player. If you think about it, every second that he delays, he's going to slow down Viper's economic advance. There is the first knight coming in now, there is defensive spearman, but it's only one Dark Age spearman, so you can think about taking this fight against it. Looks like Leenock is going to call off his forces over here. He's not going to lose the knight, I do believe. Indeed, he gets away with that. Dropping an archer range now. He wants to go for full feudal pressure. You can see archer range and now knights being built. Looks like he's coming in for a full feudal pressure. I think he realized that Viper is so far away from that second town center that it's a realistic possibility for him to even deny it. That's a quite rare scenario. Usually by this time the Abbasid player has enough stone for the second TC, but Viper moved out to the stone quite late, and those scouts also did quite a lot of work delaying Viper's second TC. That was probably the bigger factor. Viper was quite a bit delayed mining stone. This being said, Viper is getting very close to that second TC, so you gotta wonder if the window is going to be large enough here for Leenock to push Viper. For the time being, Viper is chopping wood like a madman. He's going to have enough for the second TC right in this very moment, and he's going to drop it right next to the berries. Speaking of berries, Viper hasn't touched his berries just yet, and now we got some archers from Leenock poking on those lumberjacks. It's not going to do a ton of damage, and it's actually going to be difficult to kill the villagers with just one archer, but now Viper is going to have to respond to those archers, and you see the lumberjacks have to move away, and this is annoying. This is definitely annoying for Viper. Leenock is sort of just acting like a little mosquito out there. Every once in a while, he's coming in and he's just biting Viper somewhere. And at some point, it's just going to take a toll on Viper's economy. Right now, his gold mine is inaccessible, which means that his castle age progress could be slowed down. He's forced to make another defensive tower on his wood line, as the archers are still poking away at the villagers. As I said, Leenock didn't kill a single villager so far, but he's causing so many reactions from Viper over here, causing Viper to make so many defensive towers, relocate his lumberjacks multiple times. He might not even, like, looking at Viper, Viper might not even have wanted to place that town center where it is currently. Maybe Viper had a different idea, but Leenock sort of forced him to just stay within his boundaries with that town center. We will never know about that one, but one thing is sure, Leenock is putting a lot of pressure on Viper. Now the problem here for Leenock is that his army is very expensive, making those knights is not cheap. Which means that Leenock himself is not progressing towards Castle Age, and now with the second town center, Viper, slowly but surely, he's going to start taking over in terms of economy. Looks like the first villager casualty of Viper. One villager was taken now right next to that House of Wisdom. So far, that's the only villager that Viper has lost, which is quite an accomplishment given the fact that he's under so much pressure. He's currently at 7 military, but I think he's exclusively Spearman for the time being. If he decides to go for Horseman Spearman, that could be a great unit composition to repel the attack from the opponent. And there's a stable out there, so he's thinking about that right now. Meanwhile, for Leenock, he does have Wheelbarrow, he does have the Lumberjacking upgrade. So Leenock is using the window of relative safety that is basically provided by the fact that he's pushing Viper right now to just grab the economy tax. You see that he's also spreading out his villagers, he's going for the berries. Wouldn't be surprised to see him going for the hunt, which is quite exposed in front of his base right now. And Viper is not placing a mill on the berries. That's a grave mistake. That's a grave mistake out there. So, with the Abbasids, well, with any other civilization, if you just go for the berries, each berry bush is worth 250 food, as you see over here. But with the Abbasids and the Delhi Sultanate, if you place a mill nearby, it's going to buff that food up to 500. So you will get double the amount of food available on those berries. Knights are now charging in, they will yoink one villager over there. That villager is the one that's getting punished for the fact that there were no mill built right next to those berries. So basically Viper is losing 250 food per berry. Per berry bush. That's a big loss. That's a huge loss over here. And I'm not exactly sure what happened there for Viper. I think he just forgot about it. We have to highlight something very important about Viper, and this was a topic of discussions between a lot of people. Viper wasn't really preparing very heavily for the tournament. In the last 1 or 2 months, he was mostly AoE 2 focused. He prepared some for N4C, but the thing is that small details, like for example, adding a mill when you have a second town center right next to that berry patch is something that, you know, you might forget about when you have a lot of pressure going on in a big tournament. In a ranked game, you might remember, but especially if you haven't played the game a lot, these reactions don't come as natural, or at least not as easily, especially under pressure. So you see, Viper suddenly runs out of berries, which is a big disaster for him right now, because those berries could have held out for a lot longer, and now Viper finds himself in trouble. When it comes to food eco, you will see his food count drop quite fast, 235 per minute, and it's dropping quite rapidly. That's because he's currently having access to a limited amount of food. He's dropping a tower to the north, and it looks like now we have a siege engineering upgrade from Leenock. He's knocking down that barracks with the battering ram, and so far there was no reaction from Viper to contest that ram, and it looks like Leenock is realizing this. Leenock is realizing that he can burn down that barracks, and that's a very precious building for Viper. Because the moment it gets burned down, Viper is going to struggle a lot more to get more army going. It looks like knights are being sent to the north, and that's going to be the perfect spot to strike. Spearmen reacting to that from Viper, but the moment the spearmen are sent to the north, a direct push into the base of Viper is a reality, and if you look at Viper's food income right now, it's 0 per minute, he's got 1 food in the bank. And this is the problem for Viper. He ran out of those berries so fast. He would have run out of berries anyways, but it was much faster for Viper to run out of those berries, given the fact that he didn't have the extra food on them from the mill. Second battering ram in action right now for Leenock. Both of those are full HP. And now he can start thinking about targeting houses potentially to try and get Viper to be housed. Viper is trying to intercept reinforcements with some horsemen over here, as the knights are now rampaging the eco of Viper. Viper is at 23 army, but most of that army is spearmen, I believe, and he's got some horsemen as well. But the unit composition and in general the numbers are just much greater for Leenock. We're talking about 41 army as he's pushing up with the rams, and he's got some spears, which is a great addition here for Leenock. His own spears will trade evenly compared to Viper's ones, And they will also take down Viper's horsemen. So Leenock's own spearmen is a great answer to everything that Viper has. Viper is forced to rebuild the barracks back at home because he just lost his first barracks at the front of his base. Now he's going to lose that tower out here, and of course, this is giving a larger and larger window for Leenock to start pushing the base of Viper. Viper dropped the range here, so he's making archers, I do believe. Camel archers, in theory, is a solution to the spearmen, but given the fact that Leenock has so many archers, they don't work that well. Looks like the houses are being taken down. Viper's got enough population space for the time being, but with those houses being the next targets, soon he's going to find himself housed. Very nice population for him, it's 69 to 70. Now it's 70 out of 70, and guess what? Viper is running out of population space over here. That's because all of those houses are being burnt down. And part of the reason why you're targeting those houses is because this is the easiest thing to destroy in the opponent's base, and it is causing so much problems. Viper, it looks like he's pulling the villagers. He's saying, okay, I have to sacrifice my non-existing villager advantage and try to take down those battering rams. Viper thinks that he's got the villager lead, and as such, he's willing to sacrifice some of it to try and take down those rams. The villagers jump on the first battering ram, second battering ram now under fire. It is going to be the town center going down, and the archers are inflicting a lot of casualties on the side of Viper. Mostly the spearmen are being taken down. Horsemen were able to get a flanking maneuver in on those archers, but ultimately the knights deal with the horsemen, the archers deal with the spears and the villagers. Viper dropped, I think, just 4 or 5 villagers over here, so most of those got away, but he lost the town center. And that was a second town center built, which means that this cannot be repaired. If it was the first TC, the starting town center, Viper could repair it. That town center that he lost is now forever gone, because that wasn't the starting TC. And now you're going to see Leenock just replacing those rams, starting to push the barracks, starting to push the houses once again. Viper rebuilt the houses, so he's back on track in that regard. But he's only at 8 military population, getting a market going. He's floating a ton of gold. Keep in mind that up north, he's slowly running out of berries as well. So that's the other thing to talk about. This sort of proxy eco over here is something that's running low on resources, or if it's not doing it right now, it will soon do. Once again, houses being set on fire. Viper is sending out some of his own archers here, but if Leenock has some knights to fight those, he's gonna be perfectly fine. And now the swarm comes in from the other side. I think that Viper now is realizing that he's getting heavily outnumbered here by Leenock, and the brutal thing is that Viper doesn't even have a villager lead. So much pressure is coming in here from Leenock. He's killing so much, he's idling the eco of the opponent so much that Viper isn't able to build up an eco lead, and now you're just seeing the swarm of the French army getting into the base of the Abbasids here. They don't care about the towers, they don't care about the town center fire, they just dive in and are trying to kill as many villagers as possible. Barracks are now being denied on the right side, tower is being targeted by the battering ram, and with that tower going down, Viper has no access to wood. Viper still has food and gold income from the northern base, and that's going to help tremendously here. But you see that he's just losing villagers left and right, and in just a blink of an eye, you have 56 villagers here for Leenock, 43 for Viper. He knows it's over. He's going to tap out, and with that, Viper now is down 2 scores in a set that could determine his survival in this tournament. 2-0 lead for Leenock. This is not necessarily a must-win for Leenock, but a very important set, but this is 100% a must-win for Viper. And right now, in this set, it is 2-0 for Leenock. If there was any important games for Viper in this tournament, the one that's coming next is going to be the most important. Really. This is basically Viper's tournament life on the line. I didn't do the math behind the scenes because the tiebreaker system is actually quite complicated, so Viper might have a mathematical chance to get to the top 6, even if he loses today and then somehow wins tomorrow. But I'm fairly certain that he would need some other scores to be proper and just happen in a certain way in order for him to have a chance. So if he loses today, no matter what happens, his destiny won't be in his hands tomorrow. If he wins today, he's still possessing a fairly decent chance of survival in the tournament. But given the fact that he's down 2 scores right now, this is where things are getting very problematic for him. The good news for Viper is that, as I said before when I casted his sets, Viper is best when he needs it the most. So I am fairly certain that out of the 3 games that we're going to see, so you see, we already saw 2, and in the first 3 games, I seriously believe that Viper's best game is going to be game number 3. I certainly hope that we're going to see more games between these players, so would be fun for this set to go all the way to 5 games, but out of the first 3 games, I think Viper is going to deliver his best performance in game number 3. That is going to be on King of the Hill, and we're getting ready for it to jump in just a matter of seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to TheViper versus Leenock, game number 3, match point for Leenock. It is almost like Viper's tournament life on the line. I'm not even sure if he has a mathematical chance of surviving this Swiss stage if he loses today, but one thing is sure, his job to get into the top 6 is going to be next to impossible if he loses here today, and Leenock is 1 game away from taking him into a 3-0. With that being said, spawning in on the left side, we're going to have Leenock playing as the Abbasid dynasty in red. And on the right side, you're going to have Viper playing as the French. So Abbasids versus French once again. This is a civilization matchup that we have seen the other way around in the previous game. Curious to see how this goes here for Viper, especially because Leenock in many ways has counterpicked French. I said this in the previous game, that the Abbasids generally have a good matchup against the French over here. And the interesting thing here is that the French is the meta civilization pick on this map. Now, in most cases, we are seeing the other player pick Mongols, so French versus Mongols is the civilization matchup that you commonly see on this map. However, this time around, Leenock said something else. First of all, the Mongols were not available because, well, guess what? Game number 1 was already Mongols. So he decided to go for something else, of course, and that was Abbasids. And that's a great pick here, because as I said, the meta pick is the French, and the Abbasids have a good matchup against them, so this is an matchup that could be exploited very well by Leenock. Looks like Leenock is quite successful gathering sheep over here. He's operating with 1 scout, as I see, and we do have the economy wing coming in as the feudal age landmark, or more like just wing for the Abbasid player, whereas for Viper, he's likely aging up with the school of cavalry over here. Indeed, he's dropping it as we speak. Looking at Viper's base, we do have to note that his gold mine is quite heavily exposed. So if you look at his gold mine location right now, which is right over here, then you can easily see that this is quite troublesome for Viper, especially because there are no backup gold mines. So his closest backup is over here and over here. You can see that from my circles, but if I remove those, all of the gold mines for Viper are in this area, and there is absolutely nothing over here as a fallback option, which makes this a very concerning position for a French player in case he gets pushed early on. Leenock is going for the berries for the first time over here, and it looks like Viper is going to play 2 town centers. Now, this is something that can be done here with the French, especially against the civilization that's not going to put up a lot of aggression, and it looks like Leenock is going to try to do the exact same thing that he did in the previous game, but this time around, his first scout is getting surrounded. It was surrounded by the villagers and the scout of the opponent, and it's going to be a successful kill here for Viper. He's going to take down one of the 2 scouts here from Leenock. That's a dead body lying over there. Leenock losing that 1 scout over here will also mean that it's going to be much more difficult for him to try and harass that stone mine. The question is whether or not he actually saw the stone being mined by Viper, because he was passing by that stone mine, but I think when he passed by the stone mine, the mining camp wasn't there, so Leenock might not know that Viper is playing 2 town centers. Meanwhile, for Leenock, of course, he could play 2 town centers, but he hasn't started mining stone just yet, and I think that now that Scout is going to spot that mining camp. So Leenock now knows that his opponent is going for 2 town centers, and for himself, it looks like he's thinking something different. As I said before, Spearmen and Horsemen as a unit composition is quite dangerous to the French, and that is exactly what Leenock is going for. So the obvious, or at least the moderately obvious pick here, in terms of strategy from the Abbasids, would be to just go for the double town center. But it looks like Leenock is going to try and spice things up here. Viper's got eyes on the base of Leenock, and it looks like now Leenock is dropping a mining camp on the stone, so it's going to be a delayed 2nd town center. But I would think that he's just going to put up some aggression over here, and he's going to focus mostly on the aggression and just drop that 2nd town center so it doesn't fall behind that much in terms of villager count. Now, for now, he's going to have only one villager on stone, so this could still be just for arrow slits and placements on his future towers, and it's actually possible that he's going to try to tower those gold mines. If you think about it, as I said, those gold mines are so exposed, and the unit composition here for the Abbasids would be able to beat the French at the beginning. For Leenock, everything is set up to try and make a push, and then just try to drop towers over there. Now, for now, it looks like he's going to have a bit of a problem over here with that first knight harassing his berry villagers, and now all of those villagers are sent to stone, which makes me wonder if Leenock just forgot to mine stone over here because he's scrambling for a lot of stone here, or the alternative is that he wanted Viper to believe that he's playing 1TC. Because if you think about it, he drops a stable, he drops a barracks. Viper is going to scout that. In fact, I think Leenock wanted Viper to see it. Viper sees that there is going to be a barracks in the stable. Viper will have to react to that. And now Leenock is running out with so many villagers on the stone because he wanted to play 2 town centers from the beginning, but of course he had to conceal his intentions as long as possible, and now he needs to get the stone as soon as possible. So this could be an alternative theory on why Leenock is mining stone this heavily right now and why he just now started. Looks like Viper is gonna go for the hunt at the back of his base. And as you see, that gold mine is quite heavily exposed. Looks like Leenock is going to be able to yoink that knight with the horseman. That's a big win over there. That rather inexpensive horseman being able to kill a knight is a huge win over there for the Abbasid player. And there's the second town center. The question is if he's going to continue mining stone. Because if he does, a third town center is not impossible either. Looks like here come the spearmen. And this is what I was referring to. You do want to get some pressure going on the opponent's gold mine. And that is exactly what you're seeing over here. Not a single villager killed so far. And it looks like all of them will make it back home. But currently no access to gold for Viper. He's trying to poke around with some knights over here, harass the opponent. He still has 2 scouts left over, which means that he's gonna be able to have a good vision on the opponent's base. But now he's cut off from gold. For now, he's adding some farms, which is also a little concerning for him. Because, of course, with the French, you want to delay your farm additions as long as possible. You want to live off the berries, live off the hunt, potentially even go for professional scouts and ferry carcasses in. But you most definitely don't want to add a ton of farms in Feudal Age here, because you want to spend your resources on booming, potentially making army, defensive tower coming in here for Viper. And let's keep in mind that not only is his gold mines in this location, he also has the wood line, the closest big wood line in this northern part of the map for him. Which means that if any kind of pressure comes in here from Leenock, he can deny a ton of resources. Talk about the berries that he's camping on right now. Talk about the gold mine. And while the tower is helpful for Viper, it's quite far away for those villagers to jump into. Which means that if Viper actually gets pushed over here, what we are going to see is Viper having a bit of a trouble getting to that tower. And now the Abbasid power, being able to build battering rams immediately, is going to be showcased. He's going to start dropping that ram. Viper's got his scouts at the front of Leenock's base, which means that Viper is going to be unaware of the fact that this is coming his way. He knows about the spears, he knows about the horsemen coming. One thing he doesn't see is the battering ram just yet. And this could come in as a nasty surprise because that tower, that mining camp is just so exposed. Viper dropping a barracks himself right now. He's still mining stone. Here come the horsemen, and it looks like we're going to have quite a few villagers potentially getting picked off over here. The scout is helping those horsemen acquire targets, but it looks like we're going to have Viper just getting forced back into the town center. Viper with the lumberjacking upgrade and wheelbarrow. Leenock only wheelbarrow for himself. And it looks like, look at Leenock's resources. That's the new line Abbasids, an absolute juggernaut economy. Leenock is getting close to Castle Age. Viper's got the food, but not the gold. And this is why these exposed gold mines are so problematic over here for the Snake. Here comes a Castle Age for Leenock as he's pushing that gold mine out there. Viper is trying to burn down the battering ram. But as things stand, this tower could be short-lived. And Leenock knows very well that he could sacrifice 1 or 2 spearmen for the sake of just burning down this tower. Viper is not repairing the tower right now. Tower is now on fire. Viper is now sending in the villagers to repair. But that tower isn't going to be long-lived, with that battering ram still knocking on it. Beautiful dance back and forth. Looks like Viper is able to yoink the ram, but the spearmen and the horsemen will be able to finish off the tower. Viper might even lose some villagers over here. It looks like Viper is still repairing this one, however. Viper is keeping that tower alive. That's a beautiful hold here from him. A much needed hold because he really needs that Castle Age to come together. He's got the food for it, or at least he's got a fairly decent amount of food for it. But he needs to protect that gold mine, and for that, that tower was insanely important. With that being said, he's got 3 barracks operating for him right now, which means that he's going to have quite a few spearmen out there, but that's sort of one step behind compared to what Leenock wants to do, because going into Castle Age with the Abbasids, your obvious choice is going to be the Man-at-Arms play. So by the time Viper's got the spearmen out, his opponent is already getting ready for the Man-at-Arms push. So the next step and next window here for Viper is getting up to Castle Age as fast as possible, and he needs to get some crossbowmen out. The good news for him is that he's not very far away from Castle Age. His Castle Age timing isn't going to be spectacular, but if he can scramble to Castle Age, he's going to be able to get some arbaletier out by the time the Man-at-Arms arrive. We're going to see some archer ranges being dropped. I do believe that Viper is suspecting that his opponent is up, because Viper knows very well that if Leenock wanted to push him right now, Leenock would be pushing with 50 spearmen and like 20 horsemen. The fact that Leenock barely had army over here, 10 spearmen, 3 horsemen, is a sign for Viper that Leenock isn't committing to this push, and that likely means that Leenock is going into Castle Age. So Viper was probably suspecting that Leenock is going into Castle Age. Viper piling up the resources for Castle as we speak. He's ready to go, and as I said, his Castle Age timing isn't going to be spectacular, but it's quite decent. Notice what Leenock is doing with that chain of houses. That's actually very beautiful. He's expanding the network of the House of Wisdom, and that's one of the most underappreciated things out there. So that lumber camp wouldn't be in the influence radius of the House of Wisdom, which means that it wouldn't count towards the Golden Age buildings. And by dropping that chain of houses out there, he's including every consecutive building into that influence radius, and with that, he's able to maximize the efficiency of that. Looks like Viper is going to start adding farming eco once again. Villager count at 66 for him, 59 for his opponent, so dead even. Viper picking up the relics. No, it's a berry patch. Is he going for the berries, though? Or is he going for... What is he up to? Is he going for boar, potentially? This would be a great spot for Viper to be in. Boar and the hunt, that's a ton of food to work with. But of course, it's horribly exposed, so if his opponent ever finds it, that's going to be a disaster. Remember, French mills are cheaper, so you can afford to drop that mill next to boars much easier than other civilizations. It's worth it for any civilization. The question is whether or not it's safe enough. At least for the time being, it seems like it's going to be safe, because Leenock isn't going to send any forces that way, which means that Viper is going to get away with that, although if he really wants to be safe, he should drop at least a defensive tower over there. Looks like we are switching to the POV of Leenock over here. Once again, 132 heart rate. This guy's got a crazy heartbeat in this entire set. And now you see that little orange or golden radius. That's what I was referring to. That's the influence radius of that House of Wisdom. Currently, it's at tier 1 Golden Age level, but I think it's getting close to tier 2. Leenock should have around 25-ish buildings in that influence radius, and I think that's actually the notification for tier 2, so just as I said that, he's getting to tier 2, and he's capturing the sacred site in the middle. Indeed, now he is in tier 2, capping the sacred site. He doesn't have a ton of stone, which means that he can't place a keep in the middle, but if he ever gets a keep out there, that's going to be a very strong forward position to hold, because the Abbasids can also heal their units near their keeps, so it's going to be very difficult for Viper to potentially push this one. Leenock is realizing that Viper's way back into this game could potentially be the fact that he could use the mobility of the French Knights to raid. So Leenock is preemptively walling himself up. For now, Viper is getting away with that hunting operation on the south, which is immensely helpful, because a significant portion of his food eco is built around that. Viper now is on counter. It is going to be 9.5 minutes left to go until the Sacred Site victory. Viper looks like he's adding arbaletier and men-at-arms, so it is going to be mangonels that's needed for Leenock. Of course, being Abbasids, he can make them on the battlefield as we speak. Viper is also mining stone, so if Viper gets some momentum, he could take a decisive battle in the middle and then drop a keep in the middle. That could be his game plan to recovery. And if Viper gets a keep in the middle, that's going to be difficult for Leenock to get rid of. Now, Leenock, it looks like he is piling up stone as well, so he's potentially thinking about fortifying the middle even more. There's one tower that has been dropped, and that is a fortified tower upgrade coming in on it. I don't think it has a spring golden placement just yet, although I might be wrong. Regardless of that, there is going to be a fortification on it anyway, so it's going to be at least a nice staging ground. Leenock at 400 stone right now. He doesn't have a ton of villagers mining it, so he's still a solid minute or so away from dropping a keep. Looks like Viper is now adding more arbalestry over here. Gotta wonder if he's got the Gambeson's unique upgrade. He's got some Springolds on the battlefield. Not a ton of Springolds over here for our red player, Leenock. 8.5 minutes left to go. Leenock getting closer and closer to the castle, and this is a tricky spot to be in for Viper. If he pushes right now, I think he gets repelled because he doesn't have the numbers. But if he's waiting, he's going to give a window for Leenock to drop a keep, and it is going to be just a more difficult defensive position to push. So there seems to be very little answers that Viper can have to this one. He currently cannot push this because he doesn't have the numbers, and he cannot really wait because Leenock is about to drop a keep in the middle, and he even has the villagers out here. Men-at-arms coming in large numbers, and this keep is going to be a great defensive position in here. Down south, Viper is still getting away with that hunting operation. As Leenock is working towards the relics, he already has 2 picked up. Viper looks like he's making a decision on this push right now. He's got enough stone for a keep himself. Leenock has just gotten the stone he needed, and he's dropping the keep out there. From this point on, Viper is on a timer, and I'm not sure if Viper sees that keep going up. If Viper knows about it, he knows that he needs to strike right now. If he's waiting any further, he's going to need some heavy siege to take down those buildings with, and it looks like Viper may have spotted it because here he comes, and it's only 3 villagers building this one for Leenock, which could be a severe mistake. He needs that castle up as soon as possible, because he needs some sort of shelter over here for his forces, some extra firepower to that battlefield, and Leenock is only building this with 3. Viper definitely sees the keep. Now Leenock pulls the villagers from the gold mine to finish that keep, and it looks like Viper is not committed to this one. But I feel like his window has closed for some time, because now he's going to need some heavy siege against that castle, and indeed, we're seeing some trebuchets being added by both sides. But the thing is that trebuchets don't do a ton of damage, and especially against Abbasids that can just make Springolds on the battlefield, and basically afford to suicide 6 Springolds to take down the trebuchets, this is going to be a difficult push for Viper. Viper's gonna have a keep in the middle himself with 6.5 minutes left to go, but the sense of urgency has to start kicking in for him, because as you see, while the villager count is even, Leenock has a much larger army count. Leenock does have a position in the middle, and the thing is that at this point, Leenock could start thinking about potentially just going for a second castle in the middle. Looks like Viper is going to change things up. I think Viper is realizing that he isn't going to be able to push the middle, so he's trying to hit the opponent's base. Leenock is going to have to adjust to this, as we could see for a brief moment. Viper did lose a mangonel to the Springbolt fire, and I wonder if Leenock is going to send in his forces to his opponent's base. This could be very interesting to look at, because Viper is definitely going to get into Leenock's base. As you see, the men-at-arms and the arbalestry are heading towards those Berryvilles, but the same thing could happen on the other side. So it looks like both players are heading into each other's bases. This, of course, could still help Leenock, simply because he's the one holding a strong position in the middle, but this is definitely going to be a big distraction over here. Leenock is sending over the mangonels to deal with this force. It's mostly infantry from Viper, and indeed, Leenock is tempted to charge in here into the base of the opponent as well. Mangonels crawling closer and closer over here for Leenock, and it looks like in the middle he's pulling back his forces, or is he? Nope, he's heading straight into Viper's base, so as his opponent is pushing him, he's going to push Viper. Now, Viper could, in theory, think about sniping landmarks, but with just infantry, most of them being arbalestry, and having a House of Wisdom with 2 wings on it, it would take too much effort to take it down. Whereas for Leenock, he's just going for it. He's saying, okay, I'm going to take down your town center, and once again, he's going to focus the newly built TC. He doesn't want to take down the landmark town center, he wants to take down the newly built one, because he knows that Viper cannot repair the newly built town center, and he's just focusing that one down, he's burning it to the ground. So Viper is going to lose that town center, which could have long-term consequences if this game goes very long. Some of the farming eco is also being burned down, and Viper has to call off his forces. Viper wasn't able to do any damage to Leenock's base, whereas Leenock is definitely inflicting quite significant casualties on Viper right now. Boiling oil on the way as well for Leenock, further fortifying the middle area, and he's gonna be able to afford a second castle right now. Both players are trapping each other in the middle, as we could see for a brief moment. Viper had a trebuchet pop out of that siege workshop. No, it's actually a mangonel, but it could be taken down quite rapidly. Viper is now sending all of his forces back over here. This is a force that's enough to hold off Leenock, because he's got quite a lot of arbalestry to deal with the men-at-arms. And indeed, Leenock is getting forced back over here. Arbalestry men-at-arms should be able to deal with everything that Leenock's got here. The question is, how much time will Viper have to push the middle? Because as things stand, he made no noticeable progress in the middle. And if you look at the army numbers, Leenock is still pretty good with that. And Leenock could just spend all his resources fortifying the middle. He is going to repair the castle over there. And as I said, with the Abbasids being able to make your Springolds on the battlefield, you can afford to suicide your Springolds out there, take down the trebuchets. Viper is sending villagers to repair those trebs at this point. Looks like he's gonna be able to keep them alive. The keep is also still alive here for Leenock. Leenock is building a new one though. So it's all about slowing down the push of Viper. Viper was able to keep all of his trebuchets alive, and that's going to be extremely important. He needs that 4 or 5 trebs worth of firepower to take down the keeps of the opponent over here. But it looks like it's going to be Leenock who's also able to hold that keep alive, or keep that keep alive, if I may say so, for the time being, and that's going to help a lot. Because, of course, as long as you have 2 keeps over there, it's going to be next to impossible for Viper to neutralize that sacred site. We have to keep in mind that Viper, if he runs into the sacred site, he can stop the timer. Well, more like pause the timer. He needs to completely decap the sacred site to completely stop it. Viper's got 3 minutes left to go. The 2 castles are still standing. Leenock doesn't have a ton of stone, but repairing castles doesn't cost stone for whatever reason, despite the fact that the only resource that you spend making keeps is going to be stone. They still cost wood to repair, which is a little weird mechanic. But anyways, Leenock was spending quite a lot of wood on repairs. He's just trying to slow down Viper at this point. Viper's got 3 trebuchets. He's now focusing on the fortified keep out there. You gotta wonder if Viper is aware of that second castle though, because that castle is a little bit at the back, and it's possible Viper didn't even see it. Viper is going to tower the villagers at the bottom. Leenock is running low on wood. He depleted the forests inside his base, and now at the bottom he sent out all the villagers. Viper was going to tower that wood line, so this could be annoying for Leenock, but Leenock now opening up against the trebuchets over here. Viper doesn't have his own Springolds, nor does he have the repair villagers to keep those trebuchets alive. He's going to lose 1 treb. The second trebuchet is going to get away, however. Viper now realizing that the timer is running low, so he's dropping a castle in the middle. It's gonna be a face-off in the middle, and the mangonels here for Leenock are massively mispositioned. You see the infantry from the left side is closing in, and this is exactly the position that Viper wants to be in. 4 mangonels, a juicy pickup here for the men-at-arms. They will take down all 4 mangonels, and those basically contributed nothing to this battle. Down south, Leenock's forces were mispositioned. They were distracted by the tower aggression of Viper, and the Viper is going to use this window to wipe out the second castle potentially. Now the crossbows arrive back to the battlefield, you see, with blue units inside that sacred site. The sacred site counter on the left side stops for the time being. Castle here still under fire, however, and at this point you can pause that countdown, but if you cannot completely decap that sacred site, it's still not going to be sufficient for Viper. He's continuously shelling this keep over here, and there is some repair villagers over here for Leenock, so he's buying himself time. That countdown is slowly going down, and it looks like as long as we are going to have the full cap for that sacred site, so we also have red units inside preventing Viper from even starting the decap process, the countdown will continue on. 1 minute 21 seconds left, and I do believe Viper is removing his earbuds because he's tapping out of this one. Leenock takes a 3-0 victory over here, taking down one of the most accomplished, if not the most accomplished player in Age of Empires history. Viper now falling 0-4 in N4C. One of the 2 invited players into the event. He's the one currently at the bottom position in the Swiss bracket, and while he might not be completely out, he might have a mathematical chance. I do believe that he's going to need a lot of things in the other sets to go well to have any kind of shot at getting into the playoffs. This might have been the last relevant set that Viper has played in. He tried his best, and he himself admitted that he wasn't really committing that much preparation to the game. He decided to go back to AoE 2 for some time. He did his best when it comes to preparing in AoE 4, and I have to say, I was monitoring his progress. He was winning ranked games left and right, but of course, the competition here is very fierce. 8 of the best players there in Berlin, and one of them, being Viper, he's the one falling to Leenock, but you also have to keep something in mind. Someone has to be at the bottom position of the bracket, and all of those 8 players out there are spectacular Age of Empires 4 players. So no matter what happens, someone still has to be at the bottom part of the bracket. Someone always has to lose. Today, it was Viper. He's falling to 0-4, and for Leenock, he was able to sort of stop the bleed, so to say. He's now recovered, and now he's at the middle part of the Swiss bracket. He might have a shot at the top 2 positions, but I think for him, what he has to focus on is just making sure that he cleans up his game, because he's unlikely to get eliminated now. But of course, it's also going to be very difficult for him to get to that top 2 positions. Great performance by him today. pulled up some slightly off-meta choices when it comes to strategy, and just flat out outplayed Viper. He takes the set 3-0.